Just proud of the way we played tonight. I thought we played well. It starts on the mound, and I thought Derek was terrific, especially early. It looked like the moment got to him a little bit, which can happen, I think, with adrenaline, and kind of looked like he just kind of ran out of gas there last inning in the third, but was able to put some zeros up for us early. And of course, a big home run, by Tim to get us on the board. And I think that's, when you start these regionals, that's what you hope. You hope somebody's going to break the ice for you and get the big hit. And of course, Elko comes through like he's come through so many times, here. And got the crowd into it a little bit. And of course, Jack Doherty, I thought was terrific. Did what he's been doing for a few months now. Just gives us some length in our bullpen, and then which I didn't realize, just found out on our radio that Taylor Broadway becomes the all-time saves leader here, and so what a great thing for him, and did what he's done all year for us, and that's why he's the all-time saves leader. He just so dominant, just fills up the strike zone with all his pitches, and quite an honor because we've had some really good ones here at the end of the game. So to have that record's pretty special.
Ben Garrett.
Mike, Tim keeps one-upping himself with these special moments. That one in particular, when you saw it and just the reaction in the dugout, what was that moment like, just in the moment?
Well, Ben, like I said, and you're hoping, right? I think everybody in the stands was hoping for one of those Elko moments, and we all got it. And bases loaded, and he got a fastball over the plate, and like he can hit it. Certainly can pull it, but he can hit it the other way as well as anybody. And just no doubter. Once you saw the swing and off the bat, it was a no doubter.
And one thing that their coach talked about was that, or Dylan, excuse me, talked about was that he was attacking, and maybe he got Tim with the fastball with the first at bat, and he adjusted. Did you kind of see that too, adjusting to his fastball and kind of looking for it, hunting for it more?
Yeah, I thought the first inning, I thought we were a little tentative, which can happen. It can happen in, not just a regional, but on a Friday night. And sometimes and certainly in, I think this case as well, sometimes you got to credit the pitcher. I mean, we have a lot of confidence in our offense. We have a lot of confidence that we can handle, velocity. But Dylan Dodd was everything. I think we thought he would be, and as advertised, if you will. And it's almost the hope that you hope that he would come in here, and maybe the moment would be too big for him, and that would help us a little bit, because we certainly watched enough tape on him, and the scouting reports and the statistics. You knew he was going to be as good an arm as we've seen, and he was. And the moment wasn't too big for him. He was terrific tonight, but we were able to put an inning together, get one over the fence, get a 4-run lead, and then even then I thought it's going to be a tough night. I mean, his pitch count was such intact that, I mean, heck, I'm thinking he might throw a complete game. We may end up only getting 4 runs, and so but credit our offense, Mike Clement and the guys, just hung in there, and like they do, they just grind out some at bats and make it hard on the opposing pitcher, and eventually we got him out of the game.
Chris Bolton.
Mike, you mentioned how Tim, he stepped up, had the big hit. What is it about him? You're around him day in and day out. What is it about him that allows him to continue to make these big special moments when it matters the most?
Well, here's a different answer for you, Chris. He's good. I mean, we've talked so much about what a good person he is and his work ethic, and we've talked about that for months. And I don't mean this sarcastically. I mean it truly. And so, some of the things you guys should be writing is not just what a great moment it is with, guy with a, torn ACL. That's all cool when we've seen it. But at the end of the day, he's good, and, he's a really good hitter, and he's always been a really good hitter. And so, this is unique. I've said it for weeks now. I've never seen anything like it. But I think the answer is, and again, I don't mean it, tongue in cheek, he's really good. And that's why, as we continue to watch him, that's why he's moved up in the lineup, because, he deserves to hit in the middle of our lineup.
Chase.
Yeah, Mike, you got a lot of production out of Kale and kind of the bottom of the order. And then what'd you like about inserting John Rice? He makes that catch on the Wilbur play that maybe, 1-0 and could have changed some things early there.
No doubt, it's huge play, and John Rice continues to bring a spark to this team, and we've talked about it now for a year and a half, Chase. That he's a special player, he's a special personality, and there's good things happen when he's around, and that was a huge play. That sliding catch. I'm not sure the inning, the inning, but that to get off the field there from when Wilbur smoked the ball to right field, and then big double in that inning where we score 4 right before Elko's grand slam, if I'm not mistaken. It was Baker single, and then a hard line drive to left field for John Rice. So yeah, he brings a lot.
Nick Suss.
Kind of going off that, Mike, with Kale getting the hits, John Rice getting the hits, and then Peyton and Hayden and TJ kind of breaking out of slumps a little bit. How important was it to see the whole lineup produce tonight, not just 1 or 2 guys?
Well, that's it, and that's what you're hoping is the timely hit. Over the last few weeks, we've left runners on. We haven't been productive like we normally are with runners in scoring position. Tonight we were, as you just went through, but I thought a huge hit by Peyton, huge hit by McCants. Of course, we've talked about Elko. Kale had a good night. John Rice had a good night. And so, I don't know if I mentioned it, can't remember. TJ, good night. 2 hits, I believe. Graham, 2 hits. So yeah, it was a good night for the offense against a really good pitcher.
Rick.
Yeah, Mike, could you have dreamed on April 5th that you would be getting this kind of production from Tim Elko?
No, but I don't think anybody, we've talked about it, Rick, that we've never had that type of injury. We've never had a torn ACL, and I've never seen one on a baseball field. And, it's that football injury that you unfortunately hear about, every fall. And, it's the injury that, the running backs get or the quarterbacks get, and they're done for the season. So I think we all assumed when Tim went down and it was a torn ACL, that, his season was over. But we got, some good news from some really outstanding, orthopedic surgeons that said, didn't guarantee anything, but said that, there'd be, possibility if he continued to rehab, that, some guys anatomically are a little different, and if they're in a brace, they might be able to do it. And again, credit Tim for all the hard work, that he's put in, to get to this point.
Chris Muller.
Mike, from a consistency standpoint, Kevin Graham continues to produce at a really high level. You mentioned him earlier, but obviously 54, I believe, straight games now he's been on base. Can you just talk about what he means to the lineup?
Well, we had a banquet the other night, if you will, team dinner, where we give out some awards, and he was, voted, by the coaches the most outstanding, offensive player. So, we don't have a better guy in our lineup. We got a lot of really good guys, but there's nobody better than Kevin Graham, and he's really anchored the middle down. And there was quite a 1-2 punch early in the season with him and Elko. But with Elko out, I thought, one of the key parts was how well, Kevin continued to play, be able to have, that threat in the middle, not just base hits, not, and you're right. It's got to be a school record, 54 straight games. I don't know if it is, but it should be. But being that threat in the middle of the lineup where you hit home runs and drive balls in the gap, and Kevin's been that guy for us all year long.